This is the exact federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial as reported by the Inner City Press, in a shocking turn of events that no one saw coming. Wendy Williams, the queen of hot topics and the person they tried to silence, is finally taking the stand in federal court after decades of rumors, suspicions, and unrelenting industry backlash. Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. Her testimony isn't just about Diddy. It's about a pattern of protection, silence, and systemic abuse in hip-hop and entertainment from Jay-Z to R. Kelly, from when Wendy Williams entered the courtroom. It didn't feel like a celebrity appearance. Rather, it felt like the arrival of someone who had been buried alive and clawed her way out just to finally tell the truth. She wasn't here for headlines, she wasn't here for drama, and she was here because for years the entire industry was on edge. She arrived with dates, quotes, and chilling memories. This wasn't a tabloid segment, but rather a bombshell deposition. Under oath, and everyone listened to what she had to say about DJ Jay-Z and their twisted connection. She sat down, looked directly at the jury, and adjusted her microphone with a calm but deliberate pace. I was never messy. I was never bitter. I was never lying, and I was early. Wendy wasted no time reminding the court why she was there to testify under oath about the behaviors, threats, cover-ups, and patterns she had long accused Sean Diddy Combs of orchestrating. When I first started talking about Diddy, she said, I wasn't trying to tear him down, I was trying to wake up people. The courtroom watched as she placed a stack of papers in front of her, printouts of old show transcripts, emails from executives, and a timeline of why Diddy allegedly did too. Shut her down. She started in the early 2000s. He was protected everything. DY knew it. You couldn't puff about Puff without a phone call coming later. An hour later, she detailed moments where station managers warned her, advertisers pulled out of her show, and threats were made in subtle but unmistakable ways. Wendy. They would say, you'd say, you're going, Wendy. Hurt. Wendy, every time I revealed something about Diddy. From his parties to the way he treated his artists, something in my world would fall apart. A sponsor, a syndication deal, a network invite, but she refused to back down. You can blackball me, you can threaten me, but you can't erase me. Now that I'm under oath, I hope they're listening, because I'm not lying. She also described being literally chased out of her radio station by a girl group that was allegedly sent by Diddy himself. It's not coincidence. That's coordination. Stopping until the truth is loud enough to shut down their machine. When the prosecution asked Wendy about the culture surrounding Diddy, she turned to someone else. She had long warned the public about Jay-Z, and her tone sharpened. You can't talk about what Diddy did without talking about the people who stood next to him and smiled with him while the abuse was happening. Wendy's eyes scanned the jury before she leaned in. You remember Foxy Brown? She was 15 years old. Jay-Z was 27, and he was everywhere with her. She cited lyrics from Foxy's debut album, including one in which Jay-Z is said to have written, Ain't none I'm got. The one I got, no one can be better. She read aloud purposefully, causing the courtroom to flinch. You tell me, she went on. Why was a grown man writing those lyrics for a child? She went on to explain that only someone in the industry knew about the rumors that Jay picked Foxy up at school with lavish gifts, shopping sprees, and hair appointments paid for by a man nearly twice her age. It wasn't a label signing. Rather, it was grooming. Then Wendy released something even darker, an alleged tape. For years, there was a rumor that a tape existed between Jay-Z Fox and Jay-Z Fox. But you never heard about it again? Wendy claimed that she was from her highly regarded radio show shortly after implying that Jay-Z's relationships with underage girls needed to be looked into. They called me toxic, but now you're seeing that everything I asked was worthwhile. The prosecution then asked if she had any concrete evidence, like emails and calls to the producers who backed out of my show when I brought up Jay's name. She told the court that Jay-Z's team made discreet calls to industry insiders to blacklist anyone who spoke about Foxy. which the villain said I was the first to say it. Those weren't parties, they were operations. She was referring to the notorious freak-offs, a term that is now central to the federal indictment against Diddy. She then turned to the jury and said, "You think he lost my spawns messy? Or Bernowski number. I lost sponsors because I was right and they couldn't let that spread." Next came what Wendy called the part nobody wanted to believe, the part that had her labeled as a liar. A loudmouth, and worse, telling the court, I was the first to say it. It wasn't a house party. It was a ritual. To mention Karen Superhead Stevens, who told Wendy on air that Diddy invited her to one of these parties and asked for male involvement. Superhead didn't lie. She described everything, including Diddy's paranoia, his drugs, and the strange setups. She claimed he was afraid she would expose him. Wendy leaned in again, and I played that interview repeatedly because the truth was too heavy to let her forget. Wendy testified that she had personally spoken with 3 people who described 4 bags being used to recover from the party, just as the court indictment now details. They said that there was medical assistance on standby. This was not socializing. This was organized depravity. She produced a list of pseudonyms, only of people who had given her their testimonies in private. And the court was shocked one by one as these events matched the very patterns described by Cassie Ventura Gandil. The guests, men and women, who had attended Diddy's parties and returned shaken, were instructed just to party and were told what to do, what to wear, who to touch, and which room to enter. As the courtroom grew more silent, Wendy Williams turned her attention to someone else she had been defending for years. Cassie Ventura said it back then, and she declared, "Your eyes never leave the jury." Said it on air as a joke, but it wasn't. They actually found over 1,000 bottles. I said, because people told me, and I was the only one willing to say it. Wendy testified that she had attempted to warn her listeners as early as 2008 about the obsessive control that the mogul allegedly had over Cassie when she was 19 and he was pushing 40. That's love. Love. That's leverage. She explained how the mogul's lifestyle and the private security industry's pull made it nearly impossible for Cassie to leave. I said it then, and I'll say it now. She didn't need a boyfriend. She needed a bodyguard. She reminded the courtroom of a clip she played on her show years ago that showed her looking down during an interview. The prosecution then introduced a timeline of Wendy's broadcasts that paralleled Cassie's legal claims. I was told that Wendy had access to her phones and that he would show up at hotels without warning. Asking staff to unlock her doors, she paused, and when I said that aloud, my show sponsors pulled the plug. Wendy then brought up a 2018 incident in which Cassie allegedly ended the relationship after Dylan forced his way into her home, claiming it wasn't the first time he showed up without permission. Wants control, doesn't need permission, and makes the world work for them. She described to the court how these mogul dynamics work: grooming, isolating, using industry influence, and creating the appearance of luxury as a way to get what she wants. He didn't just love Cassie, he owned her, and when she broke the chain, she turned dangerous. Wendy concluded this portion of her testimony by saying, "I saw the Sign lawsuit. I said it publicly, and now she's finally hearing, but at what cost? Cost didn't shut her, but it slowed. You don't get to talk about men like Diddy and walk away clean. I knew that, but I didn't realize how deep it would go until it happened." She testified that in 2004, when she was at the height of her radio dominance, a record label executive told her to stop talking about Puff or else she would be pulled from her afternoon time slot. The very next week, they didn't even pretend it wasn't about him. They said it was punishment. The networks warned them to keep their distance from Wendy. She recalled one program director telling her bluntly, "You went too far. You poked the wrong bear." She also talked about how the girl group Total nearly attacked her in front of her own studio after Shem called them washed up and broke on air. And you think they just showed up randomly? Wendy described the incident in vivid detail. with fans pressed to the glass of the radio station lobby, her boyfriend at the time waiting. In a car and her intern panicking? Wasn't just a confrontation, was a message we could get to you. We could get to you. She brought out printed emails from PR firms that represented Bad Boy at the time, all of which distanced themselves from her platform. One of the emails read, "Per client instruction, we will no longer be booking talent on Wendy Williams' show." This comes from A.A. Combs, Wendy said, holding up the page. "I wasn't the first to be blackballed," she added, "but I was one of the few who stayed loud about it." Dottie explained how she was expelled from Bet events, denied media passes, and lost an advertising deal. It was all planned. "I had Charlemagne on the air with me, and even back then we knew what not to say if we wanted to keep our jobs." She explained that in the early 2000s, there was a quiet but unquestionable effort to protect certain stars by shaming those who questioned them. "If you speak, you lose everything, your mic, your name. But I didn't fold. I sat still." For a moment before recounting a time that felt almost unreal in retrospect, we come from a very homosexual era of hip-hop. Mentioned book, 2004 book, The Wendy Williams Experience, which was filled with veiled warnings and coded references about Dottie, Jay-Z, and their after-dark lifestyles. People called it gossip, but the government now calls it evidence. She then related a 2009 interview she had with former Bad Boy Mark Curry, who had just written Dancing with the Devil. I agreed. And all of a sudden, that interview vanished from the radio station's archives. She told the court that every time she attempted to include someone who was critical of the industry deal, Skin Deal or Jaguar, right? She received pushback emails, threats, and FCC. She then revealed something that caught the attention of the court, a list of people you couldn't talk about that wasn't written down, but everyone in the industry knew it existed. When I breached that rule, I was paid. She explained that her Hot Topic segments were continuously flagged for review, that show producers were being threatened by talent representatives, and that executives had warned her off the record to back off, saying that I was going to mess it all up for them, ran on for myself. She paused, but now that the truth is out, everything is messed up anyhow. As she concluded, she said, "This trial is not beginning. It's the end of a cover-up, and I want the jury to know that I've been sounding this alarm for 20 years. You all just finally heard it." Looking back at the courtroom, Wendy's tone changed again, becoming sharper and more precise. She locked eyes with the jury, saying, "You think it is just about Diddy, but you're wrong." She said this is about the ecosystem that protected him, which includes names you were never supposed to hear in a courtroom. One you'll never see, one you'll never hold, but it's the list of people you don't cross, and if you do, you disappear. Wendy described the fallout from her controversial radio segments in which she revealed not only Diddy's parties and manipulation, but also how Tyler Perry allegedly blackballed her behind closed doors. "I had sources who were actually producers' agents, and they told me straight out, 'Wendy, your name is being passed around, and they don't want you touching certain topics because you're being labeled unstable.'" She added that following her split with the Precious Teen movie, both Perry and Oprah were heavily, "I was removed from the guest list after one executive told me that Oprah's people don't want you near here anymore." That's power. Then came a terrifying story. Wendy testified that she had once privately confided in Oprah about her own past trauma with abuse. And she told me that she respected me and would never exploit that story. Then, the next thing I knew, my abuser was on her show being interviewed while I was being blackballed, and she went on to say, "That wasn't just betrayal, that was retaliation the jury looked at." She then disclosed an email that had been inadvertently forwarded to her from a public relations firm that handled crisis communication for both Perry's studio and a Bad Boy affiliated brand. The subject line read, "Managing Optics, Wendy Puff Tyler," but that was all she needed. She looked straight ahead as Wendy revealed everything. They smiled with him, took pictures, and stood next to him while the rest of us were being crushed for speaking out. I understand why. Every word that Wendy said caused the courtroom to become tense. And then there was a moment that prosecutors later referred to as a turning point. She took out a thick file folder and explained that tapping the cover revealed a collection of NDA email threads and internal memos that were never supposed to be seen. She explained that she got them from industry friends who had long since left the game and were tired of seeing the truth labeled as gossip. She then started reading from an NDA dated 2007. The name was redacted, the language was ominous, and the subject agreed not to reveal any private gatherings or recordings. She read an internal email from a luxury hotel chain that said, "We have prepared the presidential suite with all requested amenities, including extra linens, candlelight lighting, and discretion measures. Mr. Combs's assistant will arrive for setup prior to guest entry." The date on the email was 2015. And Cassie was still with Dottie. If you thought this was just celebrity partying, Wendy asked for the number. Interactions with Shaw Combs, his guests, or associates could result in financial penalties and public retaliation, and cleared up afterward. She disclosed that she had proof of payments made to publicists, talent managers, and even bloggers controlling the narrative. Prosecutors showed the jury a picture of Dylan Tyler Perry, a media consultant known for her crisis sweep services, and Dylan standing together at a 2019 gala event. They were grinning, and Wendy said, smiling while women were getting paid to shut up and others were being destroyed for not signing. She told the court that she, too, had been offered a Nanda and wanted to shut down. When Wendy Williams reached the last part of her testimony, she didn't break or cry. Instead, she sat with the weight of 2 decades of warning the world and being ignored. "You see Diddy on trial," she said in a calm and collected voice, "but I see something much bigger. This isn't just about what he did. It's about who let him do it. I was told that if I agreed to move on from the topics I was covering, I could have a syndicated television deal, but I said no, and I paid the price. You see one man, but behind him is a legacy of silence, a tower built on fear, Anandia's power plays, party invitations, and billion-dollar handshakes," she said, pointing to the defense table. She then turned to the jury, reminding them that even though Daisy was the one who charged others, Jay-Z, Perry, and Oprah, the handlers had sat quietly for years, some of them even witnessing the abuse firsthand. They shook his hand, took his checks, and made sure anyone who asked questions was pushed out the door. She turned to face Daisy, who had remained mostly stoic throughout her testimony. "You thought I was gone, but now you sit where the truth finally caught up to you, and I hope it's loud before stepping down." Wendy turned again toward the gallery. This trial is not the end. It's the beginning of people finally naming names of the walls cracking and of the entire tower one day falling down. And just like that, she said, "I would rather be right in hell than be silent in heaven." NNI was called bitter and unfiltered.